All right, so today we have an exciting podcast talking about all things sales metrics with one of our senior consultants, Gerry Marletta. Gerry, thanks for joining me again today. I'm excited to get into this with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we were just talking about some of the most important metrics that you've been running for many of our clients, specifically in terms of sales metrics. And so let's start at the top. I want to ask you, what are some of the most common and most important metrics that you're seeing sales leaders asking you to run in Salesforce today? And what are some of your views on the values and important factors inside of those sales metrics?
Yeah, so the three most common ones we see are win rates or close rates for opportunities, average sales cycle, and then the dollars in pipeline. One other thing that we do see a lot as well is between stage conversion rates. So if you've got 5 stages, A, B, C, D, and E, what percentage of ops are moving from A to B, B to C, C to D, etc. Also, sometimes if the RevOps person or the sales manager is really looking to get in the weeds, we'll also see things like conversion rates from a stage to a win. In other words, what percentage of A's move to a win, what percentage of B's move to a win, C's to a win. Those metrics in particular, and we can dive deeper into this, those particular metrics should be what dictate the probabilities that you have associated with your stages.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is typically a really, really important thing as organizations become more sophisticated in measuring their sales process. So what you'll typically see is that you're looking at like an all-encompassing close rate, but not necessarily seeing how one rep manages their sales cycle, whether they are converting a lot in the beginning or a lot in the end. And so some of the classic problems that you'll have, especially if you're working like an SMB with newer salespeople, is they'll just drag every single deal to the very end. They'll go through the process with the customer. They'll do qualification. They'll do discovery. They'll do demonstrations, presentations, pricing proposals. They're putting everything out there, and then they're losing the deal in the 11th hour. And what that is indicative of is an inefficient and poorly managed sales process that ultimately results in the sales rep spending a lot more time with customers that really aren't in any position to make a decision than they should be, and also losing a lot of the leverage that they have in that sales process to push back on those customers and ask for something in return for all the work that they're doing and all that they're giving the customer. So as an example, a demonstration or a pricing proposal is often something that a sales rep can use as leverage to ask the customer, hey, who are all the decision makers that are involved? Have we gotten confirmation from the powers that be that we're in the ballpark on budget? What is our step-by-step process to actually, reach a decision? And once you've given that away, that salesperson oftentimes loses the ability to ask for that at the end, because once the customer has their demonstration, has their pricing proposal, has everything they've asked for, they have no need to give the sales rep anything that they're asking for. So It's very easy to turn around and just say, thank you very much, we'll let you know. And I think that we oftentimes see this with very junior reps, and running the analytics that you're running, Gerry, can be incredibly helpful to a sales leader that wants to use those metrics to coach their reps on best practices for managing that sales process.
Yeah. And the other reason why I think all of those metrics, at least 80% of what I've rambled off there, are important is it's important to monitor all of those. Otherwise, you will have gaps in your insights in the process. What I see a lot is certain personalities in sales will not create opportunities and not keep track of their pipeline. And so what they tend to do is they will just create the opportunity at the last minute, once they've gotten a verbal already or even a signature, and then they create the op. So if you're just looking at close rates, you've got a sales rep who has a 98% close rate. But at the same time, if you're not looking at their pipeline, you just think they're that good. If you're monitoring pipeline and setting goals and targets for pipeline, what you would see with that rep is they never have any pipeline, because they're working everything, out of the box. They're not sitting down in front of Salesforce and keeping track of things. They're hitting the phones, they're hitting email. Maybe they're using a spreadsheet or a notebook, who knows what it is. And so that leaves sales management with a major blind spot. And that same sales rep who's got a great close rate may not be hitting their goals or may not be on track to hit their target.
Yeah, and I think this is a really common challenge, and I've got a lot of thoughts on how you solve for this, but I'm curious, what do you see as the biggest problems with this, and how have you and some of our clients solved for this?
Yeah, the first problem is what I just mentioned, is the not having opportunities created. So I think it's important to set up some sort of targets for pipeline at a point in time. You know, whether it is 20K or 200K or $1 million in pipeline, you've got to determine that there's some sort of target, that you want to keep having things coming into the pipe as things leave the pipe. Now, determining that target is going to vary from one rep to another. So that's why it's important to know what is their average win rate and use that to help dictate what their pipeline needs to be. If they've got $1 million target, they've got a 50% close rate, well, then you can safely assume they need to generate $2 million in pipe at least to hit their target for the quarter of the year, whatever that time period is. So that's the first most important thing. Make sure you have pipeline targets, not just closed deal, revenue targets. Secondary to that is to also then start to analyze their conversion rates, their probabilities for a given stage. Because again, you don't want to have a bloated pipeline where the top of the funnel is massive and nothing ever happens with those deals. You want to be able to say at stage A, we need X dollars, B, Y dollars, etc. And that is going to help to make sure that the pipeline is not just filled with the right amount, but is healthily distributed among the different points in your sales process. Then that comes to one of the biggest pain points I see, and one of the hardest in some ways I find to define, which is the stages themselves. We've worked with sales organizations that have 20 different stages. We've worked with sales organizations that have 3 stages. We've worked with some that have decided they wanted to have 5 or 6 different stages that all represent a win, but they have some processes that need to occur post-signature. So after the ink is dried on paper, there's further things that they want to track, and they're using the stage on the opportunity to keep track of that. Those are all things that can have a negative effect on asking a sales rep to properly manage their pipeline. Eddie, you've historically spoken to this a little better than I have, but generally speaking, it's important to think about your sales process as having different gates, and each of those gates has a key. What that key is are the things that need to be accomplished before you can advance the opportunity to the next stage. So you need to define, throughout your sales process, what are the things you're asking for sales to get? And there's different methodologies that are out there, BANT, and there's others. It's the only one that's coming to mind. But using those tangible, quantifiable things to say, okay, we're no longer in the prospecting stage or the whatever it may be, the value proposal stage. Now we're in the proposal stage, or we've moved to a verbal. You need to have what the elements are clearly defined, and there's ways in Salesforce you can have that right on screen for sales reps to see and know and qualify and validate it before they progress the opportunity to the next stage. Otherwise, your stages mean nothing, because to one rep, verbal may mean one thing, and to another rep, it may mean something else entirely different. So when you look at your total verbal pipeline, it's not an accurate picture of what the pipeline represents.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think some of the major problems that I see with sales reps not managing their pipeline and not using the tools to track it is, one, it inhibits sales leadership from providing any meaningful coaching. You get put into a situation where you're back, 30 years ago with the typical ride-alongs and the deal review meetings where you're asking sales reps to share all information verbally. And it's like, hey, Bob, what's going on with your pipeline? Well, I've been talking to these guys and these guys and these guys. And as a sales manager, it's very difficult to wrap your head around that, especially across what's average, 6, 7, 8 reps per sales manager. And then once you get into like more senior leadership, you're talking dozens, hundreds, thousands of reps. We talk about an organization like Salesforce itself where I worked.
Yeah.
And now it becomes increasingly difficult to provide meaningful coaching, to make decisions on where to invest money in enablement, in marketing, and of course, forecasting.
Yeah.
If you don't have a pipeline, you can't forecast. And how does leadership and finance make decisions on the business? Um,
Can
and
I
I think,
pause you for 1 second?
sure.
Just piggybacking off that, what I typically tell folks is what we're striving to accomplish with Salesforce is to get to the point where meetings with sales reps are only focused on the things that a sales rep needs support on and needs coaching on. That verbal, that tell the story of what's going on in your pipe goes away. That the sales manager should be able to sit down in the morning before the meetings start and review everything and have 80 to 90% of the picture already ready for them. And that if things are going smoothly, there may not even be a need for a meeting, right? Those meetings should only be focusing on a few select opportunities that need assistance, not I'm a sales manager, I'm completely blind, I don't know what's going on. Sales rep, tell me the whole story. Salesforce should be eliminating the need for that.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big thing that I saw when I joined Salesforce. So I've been selling for about 20 years. And prior to joining Salesforce, my conversations with management were always, hey, boss, here's what I'm doing right now. Here's where I have problems. Here's where I want help. Now, my personality has always been one that I want all the help I can get. Not every sales rep views things that way. There's a lot of sales reps that want to project confidence in their manager, and they say, I've got this.
Yeah.
So to your point, that manager doesn't have any visibility, which is one of the number one complaints we get from folks that don't have a CRM that's working well, is visibility into what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
And specifically, when you talk about things like guided selling in Salesforce and these ways to really articulate what the sales process is to the rep, it really overlaps with enablement. So when I joined Salesforce, it wasn't just that they had a really efficient sales playbook. It was that it was impossible not to understand it at an intimate level because it was so ingrained in the entire process. When you go from stage 1 to stage 2, as an example, and I always like to use really generic stages to provide an example. So we went from qualification to discovery to demo presentation, proposal, verbal, proposal negotiation, verbal, and close.
Yeah.
It's about as generic as it gets.
Yeah.
When you're going from, let's say, discovery to demo, it's a very clear question. Do you understand the customer's needs well enough to demonstrate a solution to them? Are all of the key stakeholders that are going to make a decision participating in this demonstration? If the answer to either of those questions is no, you stand a really good chance of losing this deal. And when it's literally right on the screen, and when you move it in from, the discovery to the presentation or demonstration stage, and your boss is constantly asking you about this and saying, well, why are you losing all of these deals after demonstration? Typically, we have a plus 50% close rate from that stage, and yours is 20%. What's going on here? That provides some really great context for coaching for the rep, and it also provides really great context for forecasting for finance, who's saying, wow, we have all of these deals in a demonstration stage. We should be closing half of these. Mm-hmm. Here's what we can forecast our revenue to be. And then when that's not being done properly, you have a really inefficient forecasting model, which ends up resulting in layoffs, or even if you outperform forecasts, you now don't have the support that you need to take care of those customers and provide them the client experience that they want. And so it results in some really negative effects on the business and inhibits leadership from really coaching their team to be their best.
Yeah, I agree. And one other thing to add is when it comes to calculating things like conversion rates and probabilities, that should not just be a set it and forget it, in my opinion. I think at a minimum, that should be done at least once a year, particularly as you onboard new sales reps and they grow into the role and they become more comfortable. Some other key factors to consider it being worth a reanalysis of your rates are any changes to your product offering, pricing, the market, the world, any major factor that may affect how your sales team performs related to your business, customers, or the general economy. COVID being a good use case of moving from 2019 into 2020, all other factors considered, depending on what industry you're in and who you're selling to, you may need to reevaluate, right? Because the buying process may have changed. So it's definitely a key point in time to say, all right, we need to take a look at our conversion rates again, because what we were doing last year is not the same thing. It may have improved, it may have gotten worse. but you should be reevaluating that factor for your forecasting on a somewhat consistent basis.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really strong case to be made for having specific fields on your opportunity that capture data, not like above and beyond the stage. So some specific examples are reasons lost. I can't think of a time we would ever have a customer that would lose a deal and not provide a reason for it. You have other key criteria like have we confirmed with the client that we're in the lead position in this competition? Things like that start to inform not just your forecasting, but also how you go back and look at your sales process. So concrete example, let's go back to Salesforce where I worked. The number one reason that deals are lost by Salesforce is just a no decision. People are evaluating solutions and they go, wow, this is a lot to take in. We're not ready for this. We're just not going to make a decision at all. So this isn't just a nice to know. This is something that informs the entire sales process, because as you back into it or reverse engineer it, you have to start thinking like, what should we do differently to avoid spending an immense amount of time with prospects that aren't in position to make any decision at all? If every deal we lost to a competitor was lost to a competitor, then we'd be in a really good spot because we're competing well against our competitors and only a small percentage of our deals are getting to that point. So how can we eliminate the prospects that are not committed to making any decision at all? And that really informs the entire sales process at Salesforce and many tech companies overall, because I don't think this problem is unique to Salesforce in any way.
I think it's also worth mentioning not just looking at your loss reasons, but if possible, start analyzing your win reasons.
Ooh, yeah.
Because
tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, loss reasons, you look at, where the majority of them are, and, you need to focus on whatever that is. What can we do to avoid this or avoid letting the deal process carry on too long if that's the reason? Win reasons are just as valuable because you want to double down on what in your sales process is successful. If you can, double down on that, then you're reducing the possibility that somebody is not going to be interested in buying because you're pushing one aspect of the product or service that may not speak to them.
Yeah, I think that that's a really, really important point, and I love that. What else, or should we move on to sales cycle and some of the other metrics?
I don't know if it's too closely related to win reason, but I'm just thinking on the fly right now, when we actually run our projects, one of the first things we ask is, particularly for somebody who's more senior, sort of the executive sponsor of the project, is what does a win look like for you at the end of this project? It's probably worth including in your sales process a similar kind of question for the prospect. What is it that you're looking to get out of these conversations with us? Again, so that your sales reps aren't spending too much time talking about features A, B, and C when the prospect is interested in D, E, and F, and cataloging those again to see where your prospects are lying in terms of what they're interested in hearing about throughout the process, which I guess is probably part of the discovery process anyway, but I think it may be important to capture that.
I think it is part of the discovery process, but capturing it enables both analytics as well as enabling a systematized and standardized sales process. So going back to Salesforce as the example, they literally have a section on the opportunity called the success selling methodology, what they call it, and they're asking a number of those questions. So for example, part of the training, which I believe is Sandler training, is L1, L2, L3 pain. L1 is your technical problem. L2 is your business problem. L3 is your personal problem. So as an example, L1 pain, I can't run a pipeline report. L2 problem, business. Not enabling me to run a pipeline report inhibits me from coaching my team and us closing more deals. Personal problem. Like, why is this individual personally tied to this? Well, I want to be promoted from VP of sales to CRO, or I want to hit my target and hit my bonus and take my family on vacation to Hawaii. This is really important to me.
Yeah.
And what you find is that instead of taking a sales rep to Sandler training and having them learn this for one day and then coming back and forgetting it, which is typically what happens in sales training, when you embed this in the entire process and you have that sitting there in your CRM, baked into the reporting, when management is looking at things and saying, hey, I see that you have a stage 4 deal. This is your biggest deal. You're forecasting this in your commit, and yet I don't see anything here for L1, L2, L3 pain. A, have you asked this? B, how can I use, I don't have information to help coach you. I want to work with you to help win this deal. And furthermore, we talk about how there's an average of 5 to 7 decision makers in the buying process these days. I think it's even more now. What's talked less about is the number of different people that are involved on the selling side. It's increasingly no longer just one salesperson doing the sale by themselves. It's increasingly a collaborative effort. You have product specialists, you have sales engineers, you have management. And how are these folks supposed to collaborate when you log into the CRM and all you see is a dollar amount and a close date and a stage?
Right.
It doesn't tell you anything. So by capturing this critical discovery level information at a high level, in addition to like your long like pages and pages of notes, which of course are going to be reviewed, it's a lot easier for folks to step in and say, oh, wow, like I can see exactly where we're at in this deal, and here's how I can help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've got that one covered, you mentioned sales cycle, and I think there are some folks that don't really understand the importance of this and why it needs to be tracked and how it impacts like the actual sales numbers. I mean, to play devil's advocate, the argument could be, well, like whether we close it this month or next month or the month after, we're still closing the deal and hitting our sales. What is the importance of the sales cycle?
Yeah. I mean, it is important to, you would in theory want as short of a sales cycle as possible, because the shorter your sales cycle, then the more of those, top of the funnel deals you can be spending your time on. And then in theory, closing more dollars sooner. It's, $1 today is better than $1 tomorrow or $1 at the end of the year. You don't want to end up waiting until the last minute till, end of the year to close all of your deals, because that's the only pressure you can apply is some sort of end of the year discount. So that's why I think sales cycle is important. Now, obviously there are some industries and some products and services that are sold that inherently have a longer sales cycle than others. And then there's just occasionally just going to be the oddball deal that takes a heck of a lot longer or shorter than your average. But focusing on keeping your sales cycle as short as possible allows each rep to look at more deals than less. That's not really a better way to put it. If your sales cycle is 180 days, and there's only so many hours in a day, then you're only talking about working a few deals. And meanwhile, you've got leads coming in, stuff that marketing's feeding to you that nobody's able to put any eyes on, and those things have dried up by now. They're cold.
Yeah, I think that sales cycle is a really important thing in the sense that, number one, like plain and simply, if you take a sales cycle from, let's say, 96 days to 60 days, that gives you an extra 36 days to close a deal, right?
Right.
So a deal that would have closed the 36th day of the next year, so February 5th, whatever that date is, would have closed on December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
That's 10% of a year.
Yeah.
So that means if between January 1st of 2022 and February 5th of 2023, you closed $1 million, then you're only closing $900,000 of that in 2022 versus if you shorten that sales cycle, you have $1 million or an extra $100,000 of sales.
Yeah.
Obviously, it influences how much pipeline you can generate and close within a certain period of time. But in addition to that, you mentioned the time that sales reps spend on deals is increased as the sales cycle lengthens or decreased as it shortens. And also time kills deals, right? I think there's a strong correlation between sales cycle and close rate. And it's an indication of how efficiently the salesperson is managing the sales cycle. Are they truly aligned with the customer? Are the customer and the sales rep on the same page in terms of the step-by-step process to reach a yes/no decision? And if they are, you're probably going to have a shorter sales cycle.
Yeah, there's momentum. The momentum drives it. It's generally, I think it's a health indicator of the deal too, particularly if you know what a rep's average sales cycle is. When you start to see outliers, that can be a strong indicator that there's something's going to go wrong here, or something is going wrong. There's some support that's needed here, or it's time to walk away. That the prospect is just not interested, and they're just dragging their feet for whatever reason. They've become non-responsive. It's time to cut the loss instead of having that rep send out a text, pick up the phone and call, send an email on that deal every couple of days. Just walk away if it's not responsive.
Well, you tell me if you see this with our clients. Every time I've ever run a report to compare sales cycle between deals that were won and deals that were lost, the sales cycle on the deals that were lost is significantly longer.
Yeah.
And studies show this to be the case across the board, oftentimes twice as long. And it's indicative that sales reps are chasing dead deals.
Yeah.
Instead of going out and spending their time prospecting and finding the next deal, they're chasing this dead deal that's never going to go anywhere and just wasting time.
Yeah. And I think to that, it may be important to determine early on what are some factors that you can look for to decide if the deal's even worth pursuing. I don't know what those are. I think there's probably individuals that are smarter at something like this than I am, but try to identify what those indicators are early in the process and not be afraid to say thanks but no thanks, rather than letting it just trail on and on and on when it was never going to be a win to begin with.
Well, I think this is where you have a combination of sales training and metric-driven insights into your sales process to say, okay, why are we winning deals? Why are we losing deals? What are the key factors here, right? So again, I'll use Salesforce as the example because it's the one I know most intimately. Typically, you're not doing, and this is the case for most companies, to be honest, typically you're not doing big transformational deals if you're not communicating directly with senior decision makers. So if you're forecasting this big deal and you're only talking to more junior or manager director level people, then your deal stands a really strong chance at being lost.
Right.
It also stands a really strong chance at being drug along, as that person will typically ask a lot of questions, build a business case, and then take it to their management team. And typically what you'll see is these folks will want to have everything completely buttoned up before they ever even introduce the idea to a decision maker, who then shoots it down and says, we didn't have budget for that. That's not a priority. A million different reasons why we're just going to say no.
Right.
And so when you see this again and again and again in your sales process, you then can reverse engineer that sales process to say, here's what we can do to shorten the sales cycle, increase our win rate, spend less time on deals that aren't real by implementing this process. So as an example, asking questions of who are the decision makers, do we have the ability to have a meeting with them before we reach a certain stage, and then going back to that give and take. If what you have to give to your prospect is a demonstration or special approved discounts or this, that, or the other concession, you have every right after investing your time to do proper discovery and really help that customer. I'm not talking about doing it too prematurely, to ask for something in return. Mm-hmm. Hey, Mr. or Ms. Champion, I've given you a lot that you've asked for. It seems like we have something here. Can I ask that we bring the key stakeholders to the table so that we can discuss this together? And the reason this benefits you is that when we give you your demonstration, your presentation, your pricing proposal, we know that this is a fit with the priorities for all of your key stakeholders and not just some of them. We want to make you look good in front of your decision-making panel, keeping in mind that sales reps spend all day, every day helping people with evaluations. Buyers, especially more junior folks, do not do this every day and oftentimes do not know the most efficient process to accomplish their goal, which is to select a really great product and look good in front of their leadership and have a win for themselves personally and for the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also it's, you mentioned the idea of them bundling everything up and bringing it to senior leadership and getting shot down. What I often also see is the reverse is senior leader was not even aware that this process was going on, and they want to be intimately involved, and you're starting back at square one because they do want to join the call, but you've got to repeat everything. They've, for whatever reason, shut down anything that's been fed to them by this junior person, and they want to go through the whole process with you, the sales rep, from the beginning all over again. So then you just increased your sales cycle.
Yep. I've seen this a million times as a sales rep, and as somebody buying things, it's the same for me that I want to know all the information. And so, if somebody on our team were to come to me and say, hey, I did this demonstration of this product, I think this is great for us. I'm going to ask all the same questions. Like, what does it cost? Like, what is the potential ROI? Like, I want to see a demonstration, especially if it's a meaningful investment. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, this thing costs $1,000, $2,000, like, I mean, I'll give you an example. The very first Salesforce implementation I ever did, I brought it to my boss at the time, and I asked him for $3,000 to buy Chatter Plus licenses, like $10, $15 a month for every user.
Yeah.
He literally, I can't remember if it was a real stamp or a fake stamp, like reached back and like slammed his fist on the table and he said, approved, just trying to be funny. And I was like, oh, that's great. That was easy. Okay, cool. I went and finished the implementation, and then I came back to him and said, okay, we now need to upgrade to enterprise licenses in order to use what I built. And it's not $3,000, it's $40,000, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he took a step back all of a sudden, and like, this was a very different conversation. He started asking me really hard questions.
Yeah.
Okay, like, what are we using this for? And this was a great example of where my answer was, well, I was very junior at the time, and I was working with all the junior folks, and their main pain point was they wanted to produce a report that we had been producing in Microsoft Word and have it somewhat automated. And his reaction was, I'm going to spend $40,000 just to produce a report. This needs to be driving revenue. We need to be closing deals. Like, this is what we're doing here. I'm not spending $40,000 just so you guys can have a nicer, easier to generate report.
Right.
And then, to your point, the whole thing started back over from square one.
Yeah.
And I was that junior guy that wanted to like bring everything like on a silver platter with a bow tie on it to my boss, in this case, our CEO, and say, I've done all the hard work. This is perfect. When instead I should have looped him in from the beginning and said, this is what we're trying to accomplish. What would you need in order to like see this as a good decision for us? What's your decision-making criteria? What's our budget? And oftentimes when you ask about budget, they're saying, look, like most executives I've ever talked to, tell me if you disagree, will find budget for anything if there's a good use case for it, or if there's a good business case for it, right?
Yeah,
Unless you just don't have cash. What does an executive say? Okay, like if you're asking me for $1 and you could prove to me that you'll turn it into $2, like the answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, and it's important for your sales reps to remember and bear in mind, they are the best person to sell the product. The buyer that you're talking to is not the best person to sell it to that executive sponsor. You are. So stay in control and be that person. Don't let, like you said, don't let the buyer be the one who's going to go and play telephone and present what you just spent 2 weeks on with them and present that to the sponsor. Something's bound to be lost in translation. Let it be a direct interaction.
Yeah, and so I think the big difference when we translate this to RevOps is, are these things that are just talked about in training and talked about in one-on-ones, or is this something that's embedded in the process? That every single time that you open up the CRM, every time you do a deal review, every time you have a forecasting meeting, that these are things that are coming out naturally, and that your new sales rep that is still learning this process has it front and center right in front of them on the opportunity screen in Salesforce, on their dashboard, in questions they're asking every single one-on-one and every pipeline review and every forecasting meeting, so that that process is ingrained and it becomes muscle memory, rather than going to a once-a-year training session and then trying their best to remember it and implement it on their own.
Yeah. I want to ask you one quick thing. I'm curious about your thoughts. Is there any benefit to early on in the sales process to trying to engage the executive sponsor and ask them at the beginning, how involved in this process do you want to be?
I think that that's a really, really important question, right? So typically I think like your ideal scenario as a sales rep is that you have your first interaction with your champion and you need to like uncover benefit to them in looping in those key stakeholders.
Yeah.
And then when you loop in those key stakeholders, you need to do the same thing. And typically those folks will say, I don't really want to be deeply involved, but I need these 3 things to be checked off.
Right, right.
And the best way as a sales rep to manage that relationship and really earn the right to come back to that, to get that seat at the table again, is to say, okay, Mr. and Ms. Executive, I understand what your priorities are. I'm now going to work with Bob over here on your team to do that. Mm-hmm. And I have permission to circle back to you to deliver on that requirement.
Right.
Very few people are going to say no to that.
Right.
And now you're taking the first step to become a trusted advisor and an extension of the team rather than being seen as a vendor.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's the same thing I do with executive sponsors, again, on a project. Early on at the kickoff, how involved do you want to be? Do you want to be on the biweekly stand-ups? No, you want to have a check-in once every, a third of the way, each third of the project, great. But the sooner we know that up front, the better, the happier they're going to be.
I think there's a lot less difference between consulting and sales than people would think, because I think a lot of it comes down to doing really great discovery and project management.
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish here, and what is our step-by-step process to accomplish that? If you do that really well as a salesperson, and then you just know when it's time to push back and walk away when you're not aligned, that is most of the ingredients needed to be successful in sales.
Right.
And I think that's so oftentimes what's lost is sales reps are either not qualifying at all, or they're qualifying too early. They're not doing deep discovery, and they don't have the ability to articulate solutions to the problems that are shared with them, or maybe they don't even understand what those problems are due to that poor discovery, and they lose deals. They end up going through the entire cycle, just answering a bunch of questions of their prospect, and then hearing, "We'll let you know."
Mm-hmm.